Hello everybody. How are we all doing? How are we all doing? Let's see. What's this on? It's on record setting, but it appears to have changed itself a little bit. Let's go to that. Let's do that. And then we'll update the BTC. Hello everyone, how are we all doing today? This is a weird one, isn't it? What 5 topics would you disagree with most or all other naval historians, and why? Now, I had fun with this one. I really did, because first of all I challenged myself to think of 5 topics. And then I remembered that would be only 5 slides. And that'd be a short live. That'd be a very short live. Even with me getting into those points, that would be a short live. And I didn't fancy doing a short live. So I came up with a cunning plan. One currently sometimes has these cunning plans. I do apologise for it. It is the cunning kind of cunning plan which is taught by a fox who is Professor of Cunning at Cambridge University. Not Oxford. Never Oxford. Cambridge. Let's be honest. A fox wouldn't want to be a Professor of Cunning at Oxford. It would be far too blasé. Hello. With that being said, with me now being live, let's see if the social media update has gone out. Let's see. Also, happy 100th birthday to David Attenborough. I think that's today. I've been up in the attic for quite a long time today, so I could be wrong. Okay, I will admit I could be wrong. These things are sometimes the case. You also will have noticed that the Burke Supremacy is scheduled for tomorrow. The reason the Burke Supremacy is scheduled for tomorrow is I was going to move the Friday video to tomorrow, but that's a rather short video, and I normally do a longer video for a Saturday night as people have more time. And, well, I decided if that was the case, I would put the Burke video, which is, as anyone who's looked at it will see, well over 100 minutes long on the Saturday. So there you go. It's fun. Dog is napping. That is always when dogs are napping, you let sleeping dogs lie. We all know it. Right. So, today's topic is an interesting one. It's 5 topics, 5 things, as I said, which I disagree with other historians on. And the cunning plan, well, I went to ChatGPT. Now, here's the thing. I realise there are many people who are against the use of AI, and frankly, I consider for many things it is a tool rather than necessarily a replacement. It shouldn't be used as a replacement, because there is something missing from it. But the thing about AI which it can do, which honestly I didn't have the time to, and no one did in the last couple of months, was watch all my videos and say where it thought that I differed from other historians. And this was kind of interesting to me, because there's where I think I differ from other historians, and there's where AI thinks I might have differed from other historians. And it's kind of interesting to see that one, because let's be honest, no one else had the time to watch. And this was the fun thing I found out at this point, was when I realized that I have nearly 2,000, I have a little over actually 2,000 videos on this channel. I have more videos on my channel than Drac has on his. I am productive. But I did learn two things. One, Julian Corbett doesn't appear in the world of ChatGPT, which I find fun, and I have to say I was enjoying. I did manage to feed in some, find some references. It knew who Andrew Lambert was. That was a good thing. Julian Corbett seemed to be a bit of a missing anathema to it, as did James Cable, as did Gorshkov. I did do some educating of ChatGPT, therefore, and I have to admit I used ChatGPT because, honestly, I know it's going to sound prosaic. It's the one I knew doesn't mind interfacing with Google and YouTube. I knew from my experience. So here's the interesting thing: you're going to have my 5. And you're going to have ChatGPT's 5. And what interested me was they weren't necessarily different, which was a surprise. They were different. They were often different in emphasis, but they weren't necessarily as different as I was expecting them to be. I was expecting it to go through and basically decide that I was a nutter. Literally, what I did was, what are the 5 areas where Dr. Alex Clarke, on his YouTube channel, with a link to YouTube channel, differs most or disagrees most with other naval historians. So I have mine, and I have them. We'll see what happens. But there were some things which he came up with were quite cool, and I have to admit, I did sort of look at them and go, yeah, I'm not sure where you got this from. I'm presuming you potentially nicked it from Reddit, but also potentially did, put it together. It came up with Mahan writes the original script. If naval history was a stage, Mahan writes the original script. Lambert refines the plot and themes. Clarke walks on, grabs the spotlight, and says, "You're all looking at the wrong characters." I liked that one. I liked that one a lot. I thought that was a good joke. The deeper philosophical split. Mahan builds a theory. Lambert builds strategic narratives. Clarke builds system explanations. That was an interesting one to me. But what I sort of spotted through it, and the thing it has picked up, is really most of the differences between most historians these days are emphasis. Are points of perspective. Which also might be why we don't have that many rip-roaring arguments. There are a few who I fundamentally wonder how they get a paycheck. But they probably wonder the same about me. Let's be honest. Now, and that being said, let's start off with AI's first one. We're going to do AI, then mine. So, technology. And this is going to be quite a discursive live. I'm hoping there's going to be a nice response from the chat, and there's going to be a lot of chattering away and discussing on these points. Because, what do you think of what it says? Now, it's pointed out that I downplay silver bullet explanations. And, yeah. It's an interesting one for me, because it was pointed out that pretty much technology is often used, especially in popular histories, in popular books, as almost a determinist. Technology guarantees victory. I was kind of not surprised that AI picked this up, but I was kind of surprised they put it in number 1. But, that's their choice. But realistically, I don't think there's ever a point where I will sit there and agree, oh yeah, This tech alone guarantees victory. You've probably heard me talk about modern technology as well, when people sit there and go, oh, this new tech is going to definitely win wars, this new tech is going to destroy everything. I usually sit there and go, it'll probably be part of it. It will probably be part of it. But, you know, doesn't mean it's going to guarantee victory. There have been lots of times in history where the side which is the most technologically advanced has suffered. Want a good example? Vietnam. Does anyone want to claim the North Vietnamese army were not technologically inferior in terms of their supplies, in terms of their systems to the Americans in Vietnam? Now, you might go, well, that's guerrilla warfare. Yeah. That's tactics. That's doctrine. That's training. That's philosophy. And even Bijon's quipped that the mass manufacturing of silver bullets assisted the werewolf confederation in winning the vampire wars. Let's be honest, they also have the advantage that they're werewolves. Those are apex predators if ever you met one. They have great eyesight, they have great sense of smell, they actually have a chance to use those bullets, plus training and doctrine. And that's the reality. A lot of the time, things are about developments of not just the technology, but the doctrine and the training and the abilities to actually utilize that technology. It interested me, this. Because if I was considering which areas they think I disagree with other historians as a point, but I could see that turning into a bit of a battle on the Discord server, and so I thought I'll save that for after the video. So basically, you can have that discussion on Discord afterwards. I might be going back in the attic. It's going to depend how I feel at the end of this video. I might be going back in the attic to finish off boarding. Because I'm about 9 boards away from finished. 9 boards. Which is 72 screws away from finished. Technically, probably 76, because I think I need to put in 4 in that in one of the supporting joists. But we'll leave that to one side. But I might do it tomorrow morning. Now, there is also the scenario that comes with technology where people often put this technology inevitably leads to X technology and it inevitably leads to Y technology. It doesn't. When you consider how many wrong turns various people have taken in pursuit of technology, how many problematic routes they've taken. You know, we always think about radar as this great thing. Well, lots of powers are working on radar. Prior to World War II, lots of powers were working on the 20s and 30s. It's a very well-known, theory and system at that point. But the difference is, different powers focus their radar in different ways. Different powers are prepared to put their research funding in different ways. And that makes a big difference. Let's be honest, chain home is pretty darn useful for the British. But the Germans and quite a lot of other powers presumed chain home was there to watch for surface ships, not for aircraft. They believed Britain was focusing on the sea. Britain was, of course, happily doing both. Britain had enough research centres it could do both. But the thing is, that's also an impact. You see, if you're perceiving that Britain isn't pursuing an air search radar, why would you? Because Britain's got more funding than you, got more research budget and allocation than you, more research centres than you. If they're not pursuing X, why should you pursue it? That's literally what can happen. Assumptions. Making an ass out of you. As always. And yeah, new tech is always happening. Thank you. Yeah, the swordfish. Scottish nerd. Yeah, the swordfish comes up regularly. The swordfish looks like this very old style aircraft, and yet its torpedo launching methodology is one of the best in the world. Is the best in the world, especially if you want to get a flat torpedo going in. So then you have destroyers. This is one area which I picked up. They are individual warships of value. Okay? So here's the thing. I've been honest about this so many times. I now specifically avoid sections of books which are otherwise good, where I know they will list it as cruiser by name, aircraft carrier by name, battleship by name, and X number of destroyers. What are those destroyers? What are they? This is an important question. What are those destroyers? What kind of destroyers are they? What kind of value are they bringing to this? Now, the thing is, why does this matter? Because a tribal is not the same as a hunt class. Because a formation built around the large fleet destroyers is going to behave very differently to a formation equipped with escort destroyers. Yes, destroyers are your screening force, but they're as much a spear as they are a shield. And this is the reality of it. And the thing about the technological determinism stuff that comes, as we discussed in the previous slide, but also affects this, is destroyers are some of the fastest built ships. They're often equipped with some of the newest and best technology. They're often getting some of the research. One of the things that's really fun with destroyers is when you start to look at their impact on navies, and the biggest impact they have in the 20s and 30s is leadership. If you look at it, the sheer volume of leadership who are destroyermen, the number of admirals, the number of senior captains, commodores who are from destroyers in the big navies. They talk about battleship navies, these admirals are all battleship admirals. They're not. Most of them are destroyer officers. And they're the type who are literally trained and literally selected because they have the philosophy of, we don't care what kills the enemy, just let me at them, I'll use my bare teeth. And that's the scenario. Also with destroyers, you often get mixtures. You sometimes will find a British or an Australian destroyer in an American group. You'll find American destroyers in a British group. You'll find these destroyers wandering around. It's one of the great missed opportunities some people think of for C. I found a very interesting point in the internet which believes honestly that if the American destroyers coming from the Philippines had joined up with 4C, they wouldn't have been sunk by the Japanese aircraft. I'm not so sure about that. I don't really think that has much of an impact, but it would be nice to have the extra screening force. It would be useful. It certainly wouldn't be something I'd be against. It might make it more likely one of them survives. And that has consequences. Realistically, though, with unarmed aircraft and you haven't got radar-guided guns, you want fighters there. That's it, basically. It's also the fact that the destroyer battles aren't always called battles. In fact, they are often not, because they're not given battle honours and not given proper battles. But they have value still, because they shape the conflict. Forgetting destroyers forgets large chunks of the war and forgets a lot of lessons. And that's the problem. It is a lot of forgetfulness. With that being said, yeah. Procurement and bureaucracy. I was amazed by this one, that this came up. I really didn't think the AI would do that well. Which sounds weird, because I came up with the idea to use it, but I was hoping it was... I was thinking it was going to be quite hilarious, and it was going to be a bit of funny points we could go look at, go, well, this is what AI thinks, but there was also part of me thinking it could be interesting from a data analysis perspective, because it can do large data. Now, the point it makes here is, in talks and videos on naval development, he emphasises that procurement decisions, budget logic, and institutional culture shape fleets long before war begins. And that wars are won or lost years early in committee rooms. That was kind of an interesting point for me, because it is something I make. Now, the point is, I suppose, that it, to an extent, undermines the genius of admirals and, in winning battles and campaigns. But let's be honest, you need the training and experience of having ships for those admirals to gain their genius, to gain their confidence, experience, to be able to do these risky manoeuvres. Which means you need ships. You need ships for them to be able to do it. I had this debate so often I get into these things of people going, oh, we want this capability and that capability and this capability and that capability and all these things. And I sit down and go, they're wonderful capabilities. How are you going to get them there? What platforms are you going to use? And please don't say taking ships up from trade. If you're talking about a modern world, please don't say you're taking ships up from trade. A, we haven't got enough merchant ships. And B, we haven't got enough merchant ships. They're already busy doing things. That's what people forget. The modern merchant fleet isn't so massive you can start taking lumps out of it to fulfill your warfighting needs, and it's still run economically and sensibly. It's not that big. It's a lovely, in theory, we're going to have containerized weapon systems, and we're just going to put them on merchant ship and use it. Lovely, in theory. In practice, if you want to actually have enough containerized weapon systems, you're going to be taking out a reefer, a refrigerated container ship. And B, there ain't a lot of them, so welcome to paying through the nose. Procurement, bureaucracy, if you don't have the system running properly, that your forces are getting properly sustained and properly supported, it doesn't matter what you procure. If you don't have procurement running properly, you're not going to have ships to do the operations with. If you want a good example, look at the UK. Okay? This is one of the things I've been dealing with most recently. Britain's shortage of Type 23 frigates. It's beautiful, isn't it? And so unpredictable. No, it's not. I remember back when the Type 23 class was coming to a finish and they were building the last ones, there was an argument being made, why don't we order another 3? And just keep ordering batches of 3 over 4 years. And just keep on ordering them. Sell off the earlier builds, build newer ones. Just keep a production line of them going. Keep the yards going. Keep the yards with good work. have a Type 20, have Type 23s come in service. Instead of doing upgrades or life extensions, you just have the newer ships and salve the older ones. There's also the simple argument, that even selling off the 3 we did historically to Chile was not really the most sensible thing, because prior to that we had 16. So you could keep 4 available, 4 operational, on basis of 4 working up, training, those sort of things. 4 operational, another 4 to 8 in maintenance and various forms of refit, or returning from operations. So that would have put the fleet under a lot less strain. They needed 4 available on operational, so they had 12. Now, yes, you can get 2 from 5. You can, but that's putting it under pressure. So 4 from 12, 1 in 13, 1 in 3 roughly, yeah. But again, that's putting it under pressure, and that means you have no slack in the system for if things go wrong. If you have 16, you need 4. You probably the 4 in training, spooling up for operations, those things. You can probably grab a couple of those if you need to, if you need an emergency to expand your force force. And it's the same with the ships returning. You can probably grab a couple of those. And that's useful, because that means your surge capacity is quite quickly to 8 without causing a lot of disruption. And that's the thing. It doesn't cause a lot of disruption. Now, again, you can go back to the Type 45s. You can go, well, if we'd built the full 12, even if some had sat in reserve, it would have been fine. If we'd built them with Mark 41 VLS from the get-go, and it's sort of built in, if we'd built them with the full VLS cells capacity VLS cells they could have, things might have been different. Building them actually with, rather than fitted for, not with, would have made a difference to their capabilities. And that's the problem. That is the problem. We didn't do this. It was always assumed we were the masters of our own fate. And for procurement, for statement, assumptions that you are the master of your own fate is probably the worst and most stupid thing you can do. It really is. It's terrible. It's a good way of shooting yourself in the foot permanently. Because the moment you start presuming you are in charge of your own fate is the moment you stop actually providing or provisioning for things which you can't see. And again, Foxhound is right. We've got the same issues with Typhoon. Yeah. You need to keep a production line. I would have argued that honestly, Britain should have kept a production line going of an armoured vehicle. And if you think about it, the Warrior production line would have been a really interesting thing if they kept it going, kept on cycling through that, or even the I cannot believe I'm saying this, the FV 432. If they'd kept production line going of an armoured vehicle, we'd be in a far better position than we are now. And now we've got Boxer stood up and running properly. And let's not talk about Ajax. That's just an absolute ship show. Yeah, it would have been sensible. And the reality is we're in this situation because it's always looked more sensible to do the short-term thing. The short-term thing saves money. Why? Why are governments focused on it? Why do governments listen when private companies turn up and tell them, we know we can save you money? Because no government has ever got into trouble by suggesting that they should be able to try and cut your taxes or spend money on things which are currently at the moment more popular. And let's be honest, there are some things, i.e. education, health, which are always going to be more popular than defence because people use them every day. A large number of people use them every single day. Now, why does that matter? Well, when you're running an election and you're fighting an election, the critical thing in a democracy for you to get people's votes is to connect with the voter. The easiest way to connect with a voter is to pick a topic which they care about. Pick a topic they care about. That's what you need to do. So, if you're fighting a local election, you're going to focus in on potholes. By the way, if you're in the UK, there is a meme. If you're not in the UK, you won't know about this meme, but let me explain. There's a political party called the Liberal Democrats. They are colloquially sometimes known in parts of the country as the pothole botherers. Why? Because every time there's a pothole in the road, no matter how small, you can guarantee a picture will appear of a Lib Dem, and they will be posed. Let me just explain it. Show this. I'm going to do this slightly at a different angle than I do. They will be posed, foot in the pothole, pointing at it, and looking at the camera. Every single time, they will look like this. And that's, of course, to show they're local. They walk the streets. They know. They drive those streets. They know where the potholes are. They know where the problems are to fix them. Yeah, or they'll be up on the church roof or all sorts of things. That's what the Lib Dems are really, really good at when it comes to local campaigning. Now, that's a good thing in a local election, but what is a national election strategy? Well, national election strategy, the issues are usually education, usually health, those are going to be things that affect people, taxes, and probably a little bit of foreign policy, but not the type which is going to involve spending money on defence. And everyone's going to expect to hear something about defence, but they usually are going to be satisfied with words of, we are going to continue to invest in the UK's security defence, going for smart power solutions and all these things. Which basically means salami cuts coming. This is why, if you're considering today, currently the UK government is dealing with the joy of apparently deciding between whether to try and put 18 billion or 12 billion over 4 years into defence extra, which is not enough to cover the gap, which is somewhere in the region of 36 billion. Now, the gap, by the way, is between the government's own spending needs. They've signed up, the spending programmes, the thing they've signed up to buy. So, this is stuff which the government has signed up to buy, their operational commitments, the cost of all those things, and the amount of money they have allocated to defence. I will see people say this is the fault of defence chiefs. I'm sorry, it isn't. Procurement decisions, all these things have to be signed off by the ministers and cabinets and part of their ongoing programmes. I'm sorry, it is the politicians who are writing the cheques which they don't actually provide the money for. Now, what does this mean? This means that the unsexy things, not just defence, there's a whole lot of areas of government which you think about which are not sexy, they're just not cool things, elections, suffer. They suffer because they're not seen as vote winners. And that's a problem. And, yeah. Sorry, by defence chiefs, do you mean the heads of the UK's defence and military agencies? Yeah, because I can't call them all lords and generals and marshals now, because they've all got all different ranks. And they're all wandering around different things, and there's various other positions now which are involved in it, so it's just easier to call them defence chiefs. I know the papers have started it, but honestly, it's sometimes easier just to use these things than to spend the next 10 minutes arguing about the various different points that go into those things. Now, then we to my point of contention with other historians. Third Sea Lords. Now, I would say this is not necessarily contentious with all historians, but I would certainly say I'm one of the historians who most sits there going, yeah, the people who are the Third Sea Lords matter. And it does kind of come from this point. This point does sort of... But the reason I go with Third Sea Lords is because this was a named senior military officer involved in procurement who was responsible for procurement, who answered to the government but also explained to the government and Parliament exactly what was being procured and why. I like that as an idea. I know we have people, in theory, this has become a purple position, and there's been all sorts of things handed around on various positions, but I think each service, whether it's the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force, needs a senior officer who is literally acting pretty much third in command of the whole armed force, who's probably on the junior side of the general ranks, or the admiral ranks, so rear or vice admiral, not full admiral. Someone who's got a future in the Navy, involved in procurement. And they need to be in post for a good few years. I don't think they shouldn't be changing over more than once every 5-6 years. They need to be in post for a while. They need to accept that they're going to be in post for a while. They might spend their entire time, Rear Admiral and Vice Admiral, in that post. Why does this matter? Because you need to start bringing in continuity. One of the problems we have in defence, in a lot of countries, especially in democracies, but also in other countries as well, is changeovers in leadership inevitably lead to changeovers in decisions. And to an extent, whilst you should not remove entirely the civilian oversight of these decisions, you need to try and find a way to filter their decision-making ability. So that instead of them coming in and going, I want to change this because of this, this, and this, they have to first make the case to a Third Sea Lord or an army officer of equivalent rank for the army or someone of the Air Force who's going to sit there and going to go, but sir, this is the reasoning. And they're also going to be the officers who go to Parliament. And these officers would also have to sign off on the procurements. Now, they need to be an active service member for this. The reason they need to be an active service member for this post is, honestly, they need to be young enough that they can see themselves commanding these ships or commanding these units in a war, so therefore will be responsible for them. But also, the moment you make it a retired posting, it turns into a sinecure. It turns into a post for a senior admiral to get, as long as they've played nice. An admiral going into this post is going to know, if they're young enough in their career, they're not going to get anything afterwards. They're not going to get any political positions because they're not going to make friends. If they make friends, then they're probably going to make... How do I put this? They're going to influence people. They're not going to make people happy. You almost therefore need it to be a post which is not not appointed by political reasonings. But the trouble is, anything above a certain rank is going to have some politics involved in its appointment. But again, if the post is known, it's going to be 6 years in post. The odds are you're going to outlast several ministers. And they need to be there about 6 years. Why? People are probably wondering that. There's probably already people going, oh, what happens if they do too long? 6 years is about the amount of time you need to understand the system you're in and start actually implementing changes and start developing it properly. If you're in there 1 year and out, you can't get anything done. If you're in there 3 years, you're just about viable to it, and you can't get out. In a nicer way, if you're in there for 6 years, you're probably going to be more important and more capable of dealing with the ministers than the ministers are. And realistically, you probably need to have a scenario where the next one, the one who's going to take over from them, joins in at the end of year 5 and spends a year in the office learning under the outgoing one. So actually, they're about 7 years in post. Now again, it'll be an interesting position. It would not be without its contentiousness. But it would also mean, if you think about it, if they're running that kind of procurement time, the vast majority, you would probably see procurement, especially with the handover year, they'd be involved 7 years, but probably over the period of 2 or 3 officers, maximum, you'd run an entire procurement program. If you think about it, for current ships, we're usually talking about it for 10 years before they actually start getting ordered. Then when they're ordered, they're going to be built for about 10 years. You almost need that continuity of having those officers, and that's another reason why you want to go for officers who are currently serving, younger officers. You don't want a retired officer who's retired in their 50s, ending up to their 60s. They need to be 40s, 50s. That does make a difference in terms of the level of activity they can bring, in terms of the level of energy they can bring, in terms of the level of charging around the world they can do. And it makes sense, because if you have this kind of position, and then you have the officers who are in charge of each project reporting directly to these officers, then you have these things going on. Now, procurement works in different ways in different countries. In some countries, they literally do wander around trade shows, talk to salespeople, start having meetings, and then grow from there. In other nations, they might well actually be commissioning programs and research themselves from companies, and then start it off that way. If you're talking about the UK, a lot of it is long-term projects, which are sometimes not, at no point are they funded privately. At no point are they run with private funding these days. It used to be different. It used to be the British would get a lot of their research done by private companies. I know Quintiq technically is a arm's length company these days, but yeah. Now, the thing is, does this mean you're handing over the purse to someone like a Third Sea Lord? No. What it means you're doing is you're handing over program control. Basically, the scenario comes down to, now this is someone who regularly has to go to the Defence Select Committee and update them on the procurement of these ships. This is someone who, if the minister changes and comes in and goes, I want to do this, he's going to sit there, and his literal job is to sit there and go, well, sir, yes, but these are the consequences of you doing this. Because here's the real consequence. Keep changing your mind about what you're procuring ultimately means you procure nothing. The reason Britain's in the situation it is because, honestly, it was easier to do a life extension on light frigates, which, frankly, were already looking pretty frail, than it was politically, than it was to make a decision on what to procure to replace them. That's a bad situation to be in. That's a really bad situation to be in. But that's what the UK's been like for a long time now. I wouldn't say I necessarily disagree with other historians over this. I'd just say I'm more vocal about it. But we'll talk about it as we get into this. We will talk about that as we go on. This is a reason I'm more vocal. So, the value of the interwar. Here's the interesting thing. I would not say I'm so much an outlier on this, in that people don't agree that the interwar has value. I think I'm an outlier in my focus on it in my publications and work. I think I'm an outlier in the fact that I put as much emphasis in terms of writing about it as I do. I remember there was a stat in my PhD thesis about a very good book on naval aviation. And I put the stat together because I worked out that they had talked about naval aviation from its beginning. And the sections on World War I was 10 times the length of the section on the 1920s and 30s. Those 20 years combined. It was 10 times the length. And the section of World War II was about 30 times the length. And that was, to me, a problem. Because, well, it shouldn't be the scenario. It shouldn't be the scenario that these things are like that. It shouldn't be the scenario that, you have that problem. I'm just seeing if the bot's actually turned on yet. You should have a scenario where you're looking at those 20 years, because those 20 years are a long time. And again, people often forget how much effort goes on in peacetime for development, and how important peacetime is to development. The example I would give is, why does America look far more ready for war in 1941, 1942 than Britain did in 1939? Britain's been fighting a war for in comparison for those 2 years, yet America's aircraft come in, they look better, because it's easier to change over and develop your aircraft in peacetime than it is in wartime. Now, getting hit by adverts. Let me go see what the adverts are up to. Well, as usual. It's always fun. It's always fun. Now, again, the bot's having fun, but we'll leave that to one side. We'll give it a chance. It's managed to connect and find Twitch. It's still not found YouTube. It's still not found YouTube. Joe Fergus, the interwar is 20 years long. How long until there ceases to be interwar development just because it's standard peace development? The reason the interwar, the 1920s videos, are referred to that is because World War II and World War I are so massive. Quite simply, they're such big wars, the 20 years in between is called the interwar because it's basically treated as a period where everyone's just sitting around sharpening rocks and sticks and going, yeah, we're going to war again soon. So anyway, how do you get a Buccaneer pilot with panic attack? Show him the stairs to the basement? No, basement's fine. Show him the stairs to the attic. It's high altitude. Let's see. Bot on. Stream Deck still not linked up. Let's leave it to one side. When I put up the banner saying the bot's begun, the bot begins. Until then, yeah. Just give me time. So that's running. Yay. And then we do... wait for the bot to actually say hello to everyone. Because the next stop, if I'm not mistaken, is the Shameless Book Plug, where the bot will be used. It is now theoretically working. Bot is supposedly on. Yay! Questions are received. Discord is now working. And someone is raiding us. Or... oh no, Jonathan Moon, you subscribed for 22 months. That's cool. That's cool. Right then. Let's go to... bum, 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 bum. Would help if I could find my own server, wouldn't it? That would help if I could find my own server in Discord. That's always a question. Can I find my own server in Discord? I'm going to grab another iron bread. I'm going to quickly set up some questions in. If any questions have come in. Pressing the queue release button. I'm just doing this. Right, so does military procurement in the UK work differently than public procurement more broadly? I.e., any of the contracts put out for tender you see on the contracts finder service, or do any of the same procedures and process apply? Similar and similar, but also different. Again, a lot of military procurement is longer term, far larger budget, and has different oversight mechanisms. And when I say different oversight mechanisms, I mean you're more likely to find in terms of military procurement them going, well, this is going to be secret, so it can't be put out to public tender. There are also multiple different procurement methods in terms of defense, including, the thing is, during the War on Terror, a lot of effort was put into using rapid procurement. What do I mean by rapid procurement? Well, there are basically, of course, because of the needs of military forces, there are some methods of procuring which are supposed to be used in emergencies. They are emergency procurement methods. They are systems which are supposed to be done quickly and efficiently when you need something now. So let's say I need some specific combat vehicles to replace snatched Land Rovers because people are losing lives. Well, I can do that very quickly because I can procure X, Y, or Z rapidly. The trouble is, those very quick procurement methods then give you a load of vehicles and a load of systems which don't necessarily work together and aren't necessarily adaptable to other areas of war fighting. And this has been a lot of the trouble. For a lot of the European nations, a lot of Western nations as well, he says looking for something. I'm looking for something which I was going to use as an example in this discussion. And I can't find it. I thought it was... Excuse me a second. Where the frigate has it gone? No, no. 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 I was planning on using that. That was going to be useful. Okay. Anyway. So, let's use these. So, let's say I've got an urgent procurement and I need some sort of headphone system, right? Well, I could, if I am needing to buy something quickly, buy these. They're wired, they have a jack. Now that's useful for certain circumstances, but if I want to use them mobile, that's more problematic, especially with my head moving and frequent movement. But they're really good for working on the computer and doing editing or Discord or those sort of things, or those sort of phone calls. Not really good if I want to move. So, okay, yeah, but I've procured that, so I spent the money on that. Okay. So I need something to move now. Well, I can get earbuds like this. They're useful. These are very useful when you're in the gym. They don't stick out much. They're quite useful in terms of your ear support. They don't go too deep. That's good. That's useful. But they don't offer the noise cancelling, and they don't offer the advantages when I move. So, ultimately, what I really should have procured from the beginning is these. Which again are Bluetooth, but are headphones, and they have the noise cancelling, and they provide all the support and everything. Now, all three are different methods of me listening to things on the over the head, but basically, that is the most expensive procurement out of them. Actually, that was thanks to Jack Ray, who basically saw me struggling and went, "I'm going to fix that for you." But the point is, when you're doing this kind of process, when you're doing this kind of procurement, it's very easy to quickly, especially in emergency procurement, to go and buy X or Y, because that fits the specific scenario you're currently in, and it's an emergency. So you go and buy X or you buy Y. When actually, longer term, you'd have been better off buying Z. And this is the problem. This is when you get to the problem. Because procurement sometimes needs to take into a lot of factors, and that's one of the things which happens in terms of defense. But the trouble is, the procurement scenario where you're going to procure those Sony headphones is going to be a long-term process with lots of different people putting in lots of ideas about this scenario, X scenario, Y scenario, all the different little scenarios. Because, again, defense procurement is different than pretty much any other procurement. The police are the only ones who have a sort of similar scenario where you're actively factoring into your procurement other people trying to wreck your stuff. Don't know why does it sound like an ad read. No idea. It's definitely not one. Although, speaking of that one, I did have my first ever conversation the other day about potentially doing a sponsored stream. So you might be going to see my first ever sponsored stream. Might be. Still talking it through, got to go through paperwork, so look at various things, but potentially I'm going to be doing a sponsored stream. First one ever. Who knows? But there were some nice people in it. Something cool for here. It's a cool history thing. It's not. There's nothing to sell. The point is, though, procurement, when you're in defence terms, it can sound big figures because you're procuring, again, for stuff which people are going to be actively trying to break. Again, like the police. They're the only ones who are like that. They're actively procuring something which other people are going to be breaking. And therefore, you sometimes have to figure out some things a little bit differently. One example I often give is ashtrays. Okay? So different nations dealt with ashtrays, smoking, in different ways. Some of them decided that the answer was to have ashtrays which, if they were impacted by explosion, if there was a big boom in the room, instead of them breaking into lots of little pieces which go everywhere as little pieces of shrapnel, they'd break into big chunks. Because those wouldn't go as far, and were less likely to impale anyone, was the theory. But the trouble is, they were big. And they could actually do damage in other ways. But this costs money. This all costs money, because if you're building a pair of pliers for something to use at home, these pliers will do the vast majority of the time. Well, they're not pliers, they're actually wire clippers. Wire clippers will do very usefully for quite a long time. You know, you can strip and you can clip the wires. But the thing is, the scenarios where I'm using this, most of the time, I'm not dealing with the effects of people shooting at me. And I'm not necessarily worried about what happens if the material which is coating the handles melts under certain heats and will therefore melt to my skin and cause burns or all sorts of things. That's not a factor for me when I'm procuring this, when I'm thinking about this. It is a factor which you might have to think about in the armed forces. Again, affects the cost of procurement and the methodology. There's often a lot more testing as well in defence procurement if it's done right. So that was a long answer, probably, for that question. Let's see. My key release button is for some reason not working. Okay. Right, that's helpful. Okay. I'm just going to do this the old-fashioned way, and I'll sort it out later. Because the bot does appear to be taking everything in, but it doesn't appear to be shooting it out. life is fun sometimes. So, Frank Ball, has anyone explored HMS Hood, or have I missed it? Just a question to anyone if I missed it. I think watch Drax channel is what I can say best for that one. Watch Drax channel. Sadu. How useful is it working through a counterfactual situation just to see how different situations can turn out? Robert Donnan. That one's actually coming up as a discussion point later on in the video, so I'm going to say that's going to be answered. So what is the greatest example of concept that should have been developed further in your mind in a modern context? I think, honestly, the twin gun should have been developed further. I think there are very good reasons to go for a single gun. But I think also quite a few of those reasons are cop-out reasons in my mind, where they could have sorted it out. They could have made it work, and I think the double gun turret would have been a very useful thing to be having at the moment. I think it would be adding a lot of capability to vessels in terms of volume of speed at which they can produce a volume of fire. And realistically, quite a lot of threats at the moment are about volume of fire in terms of dealing with them. Now, not sure why the queue release isn't working. I think that one works. Let's see if the bot's taking the signals from Twitch. Then we have what is the greatest example of concept that should answer that one, and from Foxhound 2020, more of a happy thought than a question. Imagine if the UK upgraded its jets like the Americans did in the Cold War, because Buccaneers with similar upgrades and weapons as the US 786. It would be interesting. It would be interesting. Why is it removing my ticks? Okay, Discord and the computer systems are playing up tonight, aren't they? They really are. Joel Fredericks, that question. Why do you think Asian navies are better with their procurement strategies than European ones, even though everyone had a peace dividend in the 90s? It's a kind of loaded question. A, that presumes all Asian navies are better with their procurement. Sorry to say they're not. Secondly, I would say you always have to remember that the Cold War was fought not just against the Soviet Union, it was also Communist China was also a big part of it. And the fact is, where Russia seemed to go away and become a friend, or at least start to fall off the cliff, China didn't. And most of those navies, most of those nations were looking at their shoulder going, yeah, peace dividend. They still didn't procure quite as much as they had been, but, you know, they had some procuring going on. Leslie, you think you have upset the bot and or Discord? Potentially both. Potentially, I'm going to have to get Runon to look at everything and check everything's working. Do a bit of maintenance. PDP processor. How does Japanese social contract of job for life enable the construction programs? don't really necessarily think so. I think it does. It's certainly part of it, but that's not really the whole of it, or even a large chunk of it. That's more to do with workforce and workforce training. Right. So, with that being said, I'm going to still put the question live banner up, because I'm taking questions. It's just the bot's not releasing them, so I probably should not actually have it up. But it's bot issues. I'm still taking questions. I don't know. Bots are fun times. Anyway, interwar. Yeah, that's something I put in there. It's not so much a disagreement with other historians as a difference of emphasis. Most of the other historians I work with, and this is an important point, tend to, how do I put this? Okay. So the big difference between me and a lot of my colleagues, especially in academic historians, is our funding and research funding, and also how we go about selling books. So you think about it. With a lot of my colleagues, they are dependent upon other people to sell their books to them. They are. They are dependent upon other people to sell their books to them. It's the publisher who's doing the advertisements. They might do a bit of social media tweeting, but that's about it. They are going to depend on how the book does in terms of it picking up how much it's appreciated in bookstores. They're going to depend on... I'm still looking for what I was looking for earlier, which would have been far better than the headphones, because no one would have confused that with an advertisement, because no one would ever think anyone's advertising that. But I cannot find it for the life of me. The reality is, though, I don't have to rely on those things. I do my own YouTube channel. I do my own advertising. In some ways, and I fund my research from YouTube as well. This is what all the funding from Patreon, all these things, it goes towards. It's funding my YouTube, it's funding my research, it's funding my work. This makes it different for me. In some ways, yes, I suppose I'm more directly exposed to public opinion. But in other ways, I'm also slightly more insulated. Let me explain that one. I am basically the equivalent, and I would say everyone with a YouTube channel is to an extent like this, the equivalent of a print baron of the 1920s. You know, never have the old saying, never have an argument with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Well, this is very true. Never have an argument with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Because they can just keep talking. If I make a point, a slightly contentious point, or a point which could get others in trouble, that's fine. I can explain my thinking. I can give people the analysis. I can explain my position, and I can answer directly to the public, and I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to have my debate. I'm happy to, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, I'm right. And I'm happy to have the debate to discuss that. I have that opportunity. Others don't. So this is one of the reasons why I'm also as cautious as I am when I do book reviews. You'll never see me do a book review of a book I don't like. Why? Because they don't have right or reply here. I have a megaphone. You know how easy it would be to pick up some of the books by some pretty famous authors that I disagree with, and write a video which basically goes, X is wrong about Y, and slam them? I could. I wouldn't. There is no point in doing that. There is no point in that kind of vitriolic attack. I'll make a discussion on a topic and I'll put forward all the other arguments, but I will never mention them. Because YouTube and all this stuff gives me a slightly different scenario. But in many ways, that's because I am a slightly different historian. I can afford, therefore, because I have the audience, because I have these things, to go in and focus on things like the interwar and not worry about wrapping it up in the cloak of World War II or World War One. I don't have to wrap it up in those things as sales. It would make sense from properly a profit margin perspective, but to me it's not necessary to get the things to get the first few sales and hopefully get the first things out there, because I hopefully have enough of a trust built up with my audience, those people who subscribe and follow and watch the channel, that if I produce a book which is maybe not of a topic, or they immediately go, oh, I immediately think I want that, or immediately want that, they'll still maybe think, well, hang on, that's Dr. Clarke, I quite like his work, I quite like his stuff, I think I'll try that book, it's not too expensive, I'll give it a go. And that will hopefully generate its own sales of people reading it, liking it, sharing that they like it, and carrying on. And that's the point. Thank you for all the gifted memberships away, Wade. Thank you. You have this scenario whereby I can do that. And I'd love more historians to be like it, but I honestly realise this is one of the bigger differences which I'm getting to, and I'm going to be talking about. Because as we go on, yeah. Oh, finally, there, number 4 was Destroyers of Value. Mine was a lot earlier. This was actually did lead me to some interesting things, though, when looking at this one. Because how they put it was different than how I did it. Apparently I argue regularly that destroyers, escorts, and support vessels are structural backbone assets. I quite like that as language. I have to admit, the one thing I have found interesting is they are quite good at the quippy one-liners. And they come with things like, traditional naval history is famously capital ship-centric. Clarke flips the spotlight to the fleet's connective tissue. I like that phraseology. It's not really my phrase, but, it's a fun phrase to have. And they used escorts as a key to control, protection, and presence. What I also found quite fun was they did produce some videos about, what are central to these things. And Admiral Ollie Burt, the conveyor of the modern US Navy, comes up there. Which is nice to say. But really, I've already got into why I do destroyers. Now, my next thing is approach to alternate histories. This is because I come from the war studies side. Okay, I honestly admit this. I come from war studies. That's my PhD topic. Well, my PhD area was war studies. I'm a historian, but my PhD was war studies. I'm a naval historian, did naval history in the Lawson Department of the King's College London's War Studies Department. Now, war studies is a little bit different than military history. As a culture, we are far more happy with alternate histories. We are far more happy. We have rules about how we approach these things. You'll again notice in my own, when I do alternate histories, I usually have a bit of a time limit. I usually go, right, and I can give you up to X point, but I cannot go to Y. Why? Because frankly, by that point, I am building on assumptions on assumptions on assumptions. And that means I am basically going beyond where I can logically support. I'm able to go 2 steps. That's the rule we usually tend to use. 2 steps. Your logic is 2 steps. You make one logical change and you can go a step beyond that. You're making a change and you can go a step beyond that. And to an extent, you can work out how these changes will have an impact, but, this is the reality of it. Now, alternate histories are also fun in terms of examining the history. One of the things is you have to actually be pretty good and pretty knowledgeable to history to be able to do an alternate history. I used to find this the fun thing with students, because when you set them an alternate history, the first time they'd think it's a breeze. They'd go off and they'd write something, and then they'd come back and you'd tear it to pieces. Because they hadn't gone and looked at the history. They hadn't gone and looked at the economic factors, the political factors, the social factors, the technological factors, the cultural factors, all the things which are going into play with these scenarios. And I know I don't always explain all those points as I'm doing an alternate history, because otherwise it would be endless things of me going, well, due to the social factor of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And the reason is because you need to understand those things to try and give an idea for why they can't do that. One of the reasons why, whenever people go, could you maybe do an alternate history of the Germans or the Italians suddenly getting these massive forces, I usually go, well, that would be hand-wavium, because the reason they couldn't get there is because of infrastructure, and they'd have to invest and grow that infrastructure. It's not just a case of, we have money, build. It's a case of, we have money. Okay, now we first got to build the facilities, train the shipyard workers, then we can start building the ships. That all takes time. It takes a lot of time. And thank you, Wade. Now, that's a very real thing with alternate histories. It's very easy. This is the trouble with alternate history as a historical analysis tool versus alternate history as a fiction tool. You can write really cool books when you're writing as a fiction. You can. And I love to read them. They sometimes give me all sorts of ideas, which I go off and send in scenarios. I've talked about this before. Red Storm Rising, Tom Clancy's book. I've used that to set up so many scenarios for students to work through on strategic analysis over the years. Hundreds of them over the years. It must be. And it is, realistically, an alternate history. It's what might have happened in the Cold War going hot. It's a really useful read for that scenario. It is. Now, I would also say, with alternate histories, I'm more comfortable doing this than most other historians. Why? Okay, here's the thing. The legacy of my dyslexia means that I have been told I'm wrong a lot in my life. And when I'm wrong, and I actually am wrong, I stick my hand and go, I was wrong, mea culpa. I'll learn and do better next time. But I'm used to it. It doesn't affect my self-image, and I don't feel like it undermines my public image if I'm wrong. It gives me a learning moment, but it's not something bad. Now, I'm lucky in that. Let's be honest, I'm a white guy with a beard. I'm gonna put this out there. That doesn't mean I can't, in my mind, that doesn't grant me a privilege or anything, but that does mean that there are a lot of me on the internet. So, it's very unlikely for me to get singled out and become public ridicule if I make one mistake. I'm not getting that level of attention. Most people who are coming to see me and my channel are coming here for naval history. They're not coming here for anything else. I am not a pin-up model. I am not a cool celebrity. I am not someone who is, going to attract people for attention for anything other than the naval history I'm offering. So that also gives me an advantage in this scenario. I have that as an audience. And I love that audience. I love my audience. You are all really nice and really cool people. It's one of the fun things I have going in my life is chatting with you all. But I am not under the impression that any of you are here for my startling good looks. In other words. So that helps me. That helps me doing alternate histories. That helps me. That means if I'm wrong, it doesn't turn into a gotcha moment that flashes around the internet. And before anyone asks, yes, I do know about some of the forum discussions of me, etc. I did once get sent a whole thing of someone going, wow, this person says you're a Corbeticist, and you therefore don't understand things like Mahan. And I remember reading that and thinking, this person hasn't ever read Mahan. Because, as I've said many times, if you actually read Mahan and Corbett, you'll find they're saying very similar things. One is saying it to an audience of a nation that he's trying to actually get to buy a navy. The other one's trying to remind a nation how they're supposed to use a navy. That is the big difference between Corbett and Mahan. It's they're focusing on their audience, not what they're saying. Yes, therefore, Mahan emphasizes the battles slightly more than Corbett, because Mahan is trying to sell it to a country which really doesn't understand, at that time, especially its political class, the need for a navy and the reason to fund on. So, you have to tell them on something which is cool and sexy. Battles are cool and sexy. We've been over this. Logistics is boring. It wins wars, but it's boring. Investing in dockyards is boring. So this is the fun thing for me. But again, I don't mind, because to me, someone saying that and then writing whole things about my videos and all these things means they're watching my videos. And the purpose of me doing this stuff is to share my love for naval history and hopefully encourage others to love it as well. Wade, we are here for Raleigh's good looks. I know. But at the moment he's enjoying other things. Look, he's looking forward to be back in this office when the building works on. One of the reasons why he's not down this side of the office at the moment and this side of the house is because the wall and everything in that direction have gone for building work to carry on for the garage, etc. and stuff that's going up there. And so it's one of those things of when there's stuff like concrete setting, we don't want to run the risk of him getting out to the concrete. I wish, Bitchon. No, I think they thought we were probably family reuniting, not, cool celebrities. Now, the next fun point that they did make about me was Mythbuster. Okay, myth-busting the tidy narratives. And I like that phrase, myth-busting tidy narratives. Challenges obvious shit categories. The thing which I've been getting into, the capital ship spectrum. That is an area which does get contentious quite quickly, because there are people who are wedded to their views of ships are this and they are always this. That's me going, well, it's a spectrum, and even more fun than a spectrum, it's a spectrum which is evolving due to technology. Due to technology, due to development, due to the quality of armor, the naval architecture, level of subdivision we're putting in, the buoyancy we can get in the engine, the power to weight ratio of the engines, how much power per ton the engine unit is actually coming into. All these things have an effect on design. You get into this when people go, well, if the G3s had been built, they would have been fast battleships. No, they would have been battlecruisers. Why? Because if you look at the sodding N3s, if they get built, no one is going to confuse that in any scenario, the G3 with a fast battleship. Because they're going to look at the level of armouring and coverage on the N3s, and they're going to go, oh my lord, lubberduck, you've made a solid lumber steel float. In which case, in comparison, the G3 is going to look positively under-armoured. And that's the spectrum. The spectrum has moved because the quality of production, in terms of the quality of power to weight ratio of the engines and the honeycombing and structuring we can put in the ships has changed. The armouring, the level of armouring you can build on the ship's hull has changed. So it's evolved. It's even the same when we start talking about F3s. Again, the F3 is the closest of the Royal Navy's battlecruiser line to a fast battleship. Why? Because like the G3, the F3 is an evolution based on the Tiger line. And as I've said before, you cannot make the case for Hood being a fast battleship if you do not make the case for Tiger being a fast battleship. And no one ever makes the case for Tiger to be a fast battleship. Yet Tiger actually has a denser construction than Hood. Tiger has better subdivision for her tonnage, for her size, than Hood. Tiger has way better subdivision than a Renown or a Pulse. So if you do not make the case that Tiger is a fast battleship, you cannot make the case Hood is one. I'm sorry. This upsets people, I know. It does upset a few of my colleagues, but when they look at the maths, they go, you're right. No one's yet made the case that Tiger is a fast battleship. Until someone starts making that case, they can't really make the case that Hood's a fast battleship. Because they're not. They're battle cruisers. And of those, the one which is closer than the spectrum to fast battleship is Tiger, not Hood. Trust me, if Tiger had been built with 15-inch guns, the world would have been a very different place in analysis of that ship. The only reason she's forgotten is because she had 13.5-inch guns, and so the Royal Navy don't keep her around for World War II. Trust me, if she'd been built 15-inch guns, the odds are it's an R-class battleship which gets the drops, not a Tiger, in the run-up to World War II. And Tiger gets a modernisation, and that's a really interesting time. Because a 15-inch armed Tiger, modernised, in World War II, could have been interesting. Now, the thing is, I kind of like this because it said, dismantles simplified stories such as clean technological revolutions and decisive single battles and linear progress in naval design. Yeah, I did like that. Now, the thing is, a lot of history is not necessarily simplified because it's bad history. It's usually quite good history. It's usually simplified and tidied up because it makes it easier to put in bite-sized formats. I understand this. If I'm going to be selling something in a short book, if I'm going to be selling something in a TV program, I don't have time necessarily to get into something in that level. So I keep it a narrative. And this is the point. Again, I benefit from the audience. I have, from all of you. I can afford to go into stuff like that. I can afford to go into the weeds a bit and explain these things through and go through them. And I can afford also, and this is something I do, which I know other historians I have actually received feedback about my policy of doing this, and it's not appreciated, that I will give you my hunches, which I cannot prove. And I'll tell you, I've got the evidence which gives you what... For example, again, let's talk about the 6th Queen Elizabeth class, which is one of mine and Drax's favourite things to discuss. What would HMS Agincourt of the Queen Elizabeth class been? Would she have been 18-inch guns? I think 6 18-inch guns. Drax puts forward triple 15s. We just debate. And I can tell you she was being built. I can tell you the reason she was cancelled. I can tell you various programmes which are going on at the time and things which appear, including small tube boilers, which the first batch of small tube boilers are ordered, are available. So I think she was going to have small tube boilers. And the 18-inch guns, again, where do they come from? They're attached to a ship programme, but we don't know which ship programme is attached. The only battleship which is cancelled, the only ship which is big enough to probably accommodate 18-inch guns is Agincourt. And it makes sense why they're cut down. So all these things, start to add up. But I cannot provide you with a document which is a smoking gun proving that. And that's the point. I can explain that in a video. I've told you before, I can't really put that down in a book because someone, with the rules of books, the way it's quoted, etc., reference, someone can very easily quote that out of context. I can go off. Whereas with videos, well, people can always people can watch the video. Anyone can link to the video. They don't have to own the book to be able to link to it. And they can find out what I actually said. No, Alex didn't say that. Alex said that's his suggestion. And yeah, this is the point. This is the fun bit. And it is a fun bit. Now, go on from there. We get to methodology. Now, this is something where I would say it's not so much I differ with other historians as I flagrantly ignore what a lot of other historians do. I chase the audience. And I admit I do this. I put myself into scenarios where I am not going to feel comfortable actively into scenarios which are outside my comfort zone to find other people who might be interested in history and try and get them interested in history. I actively chase things. Good example coming up, TwitchCon in Rotterdam. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there with a panel with Garius the Brit, with Killerbin, with the Fleet of Oceans. I'm going to be there with 3 pals on a stage, which is, and I'm just going to make sure I get the right stage, on the PJ Sugar stage, I think it is. Yeah. PJ Sugar stage. On the 30th of May, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to be at TwitchCon. And I would never have thought I'd have been doing that a few years ago, but it's the part of the point of I put myself forward for these things because you don't find anyone new to talk to. You don't get any new ideas if you're sitting inside your nice little ivory tower, or your cubicle, or your social bubble. I don't care what you want to call it, and I know ivory tower is the one usually used to deride academics, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm picking up on that one because it doesn't matter what you call the scenario. If you just talk to the people you're already talking to, you'll never get anything new. You'll never get anything interesting. You'll never be able to go and find more people. So I go and do TV work. I go, there's my IMDb profile, I think it is. And, these things. I go and do all this stuff because, and I do the shameless book plug, because it gives me a chance to reach more people. And that's the important thing.
You want to reach as many people as you can. You want to share history with as many people as you can. One of the things I find really annoying is some of the most learned historians I know are also some of the ones who are most focused on they will only publish in journal articles. And the thing about journals is I've pretty much given up publishing in them at all. I got 3 articles still going for review. They've been going for review for, like, years. They might be published eventually. Who knows? But I haven't submitted a new journal article since 2021. Which, as an academic, is supposedly academic death. Do you know why I haven't submitted one? Because if I wanted my work to only be exposed to a couple of hundred people, I'd go down the local pub and have a chat there. I'd probably reach more people. And yes, there is the part that you can, by doing journal articles, you can communicate with people who are your academic peers, and you can have these lovely learned discussions. But the point about that, and that's lovely, is I can also do that by just emailing those people. That's the other thing with naval history, I do admit. Naval history is a small enough academic community that most of us have each other's emails. Which is another thing for me again. There are other academic communities where you definitely do need to do journal articles. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying naval history as an academic community. I literally was having a conversation with a very senior academic the other day, who's a very old friend of mine, and the question was, so, yeah, I need to talk to James. Oh, you mean James so-and-so? No, Alpha James. James so-and-so? No, James da-da-da, James da-da-da. Through about the 10 Jameses who were involved in that area of naval history. And it was like, oh yeah, that one. There are about 3 of them who are called James Smith. Now, I have to admit, this is another reason why I do love the trips abroad for the ship shape crew. Because I get to meet naval historians from other parts of the world. The really worrying thing, though, is, again, how many of them I already have the email address for. I think there was, like, 4 professors we bumped into in the entire trip in Japan, who were Japanese naval history professors. And every single time we were talking with them, when we were handing out their cards, they went, of course, Alex, you already have my details. I would take their card, of course, and we'd exchange business cards, but they would exchange business cards with me, and then he'd laugh and go, of course, you already have my details, don't you? Yes, I do, from the Greenwich Conference and that date, or the conference at King's, or the conference at Sandhurst, or the conference... yeah. That is it. That is the reality of naval history. There is a reason why, when you're looking on YouTube, there is a joke sometimes that when there's certain enough of us in Shipshape crew together, that there is a large chunk of the world's naval historians are in one place. And, Chandlord, before you joke about the James Department, 4 of those Jameses work in the same institution, which employs exactly 10 military historians. They employ exactly 5 naval historians, 4 of whom are called James, 1 of whom is called Sarah. I kid you not. That is literally one entire naval history department is the Jameses and Sarah. Or Sarah and the Jameses. By the way, that department is not in the UK. I know that department, though. But they are a department in the... I think that... which side of the border are they? They're in North America. They're in the North American continent. I think they're on the Canadian side of the border. But yeah, it's just... Sarah, by the way, is the head of the department. She would like to point out she's only hired 2 of the Jameses. Mission, you should try your sign. I've been printed in proceedings. I think I've done a couple of articles in there. I think I have. I'm not sure. Probably have. I've done so. I have opted a policy over the years of doing articles everywhere. Currently, I'm being chased by a couple of magazine editors who want me to write articles, and I haven't responded to them. And I've got to, and I should write the stuff for them. But the trouble is, I've been doing the attic and sorting out everything else here. No. Seneca, I was hoping no one would ask what Sarah's husband's name is. He's a very nice guy called James, who is not a historian. So, yeah. But he is... He's a... I do remember she told me once long because she made the joke at a conference, and I'm trying to remember the joke she made, but no, it's fun. Is it a rule naval historians have to be bearded? Not necessarily, but we do look on the unbearded ones as follically challenged. No, the naval historians do not have to be bearded. In my case, I have a beard because it's kind of my family thing. We all seem to end up having a beard at some point. But, you know. Oh, it's fun. But yeah, the methodology is, you know, it's this is the thing which I would say I differ in most, and it does get me into trouble sometimes with other historians, because I do go and jump into things, and I don't really care. If it looks like I'm going to meet new people and be able to chat away, I'll go do it. Yeah, USI and I published my book, so, you know, there's that fun. When I did ask ChatGPT to go into this and see what it said, and the point it made was kind of interesting to me. Apparently, academically, I'm fairly mainstream modern naval history. I am now. It used to be different. But as difference can be that the fact that I do keep, you know, the institutional analysis, procurement criticism, and systems theory into my things, when apparently that's not expected of YouTube naval history. I don't know. I've watched Drax's videos. He is just as sarcastic as I am. I did love this word. It's like showing up to a medieval joust and delivering a lecture on horse breeding economics. Technically relevant, socially destabilizing. Yes, but I would turn up to the joust, I would joust, win, and then I would deliver a lecture on horse breeding economics. Because it'd be fun to do that. That's what my family would expect me to as well. But the reputation of contrarian comes less from what he believes and more from what he chooses to emphasize. He agrees with mainstream historians on the importance of sea power, state context, logistics, and complexity. He disagrees mainly on where to put the spotlight and how to tell the story. And that's the thing. I disagree on how to tell the story. And I like that phrasing. I do. That's often where I get into trouble with other historians, because I disagree on how to tell the story. On how to show the history. You see, in my world, I come from... This is going to sound strange. I was an IT technician the entire way through my bachelor's and my master's. That's how I paid my bills. I worked as an IT technician. I still build computers. I've been building computers since I was 13 years old. I've been relying on computers for my work because of my dyslexia since I was 11 years old when I was diagnosed. Dysgraphia, which at that point was part of dyslexia, then was for some reason shoved off and out of dyslexia, so I ended up with having two. There's an old rule in these usual labels: usually have one or you have three. I have two, but it's not a proper two because when I was younger, dysgraphia was part of dyslexia, and then they shoved it out. So I actually only had one. I just gained one when they decided it was its own category. Bad handwriting needed to be its own category. My dysgraphia is caused by my dyslexia. I'm a genetic dyslexic with limited to non-functioning short-term memory. So everything has to run through my long-term memory, which means I'm a computer with no RAM. And that means if I'm handwriting, because of the way it works with your body, my hand can't keep up with my brain. I've got nothing to slow it down. And that means my hand gets overloaded, my handwriting turns into a squiggle, which is ineligible to everyone, including myself. When you're typing, because of the greater spatial awareness you need for positioning the fingers and for typing, it slows down the thinking just enough that the hands can keep up with the brain, and I don't need to worry about the lack of RAM, and I can keep on typing. So that's the fun thing. Now, why am I using that as an example? Why do I bring that up? Well, I come from a slightly different background than most historians. When I talk about my A-levels for most of my historians, I sit there and go, well, I did maths, physics, ICT, and history. And then I did a bit of government politics. Usually, you are one way or the other, but I tend to straddle the both. I've done engineering qualifications as well as history qualifications and international relations qualifications. Now, the engineering qualifications I mostly got because I was doing history of engineering and I was teaching engineering students, and I come from an engineering family. I already knew the stuff, and I needed to take them out in the field. They needed extra lecturers to go out with them in the field for their field tests and their coursework, and I would volunteer. So I would learn how to use the survey tools. I would learn how to use CAD. I would learn how to use all these things. And to me, that's where the difference comes from. I come from in the nicest way, in my experience, the engineering part of the brain has been as important as the historical part of the brain, i.e. the maths and the art side. I needed to bring both in. And it's often by fusing both sides, the information you get from the history and and I would say the specifics you get from the science side, that I was able to be quite as good as an IT technician as I was. I'd often translate, and I was, by the time I was finishing being a working as an IT technician, I was basically the one sent almost every single time to interview members of staff to work out what computers they were going to get, what their job really required. Because on average, when I went to do it, the PC lasted the full 3 years without us having to upgrade it, because it was supposed to be a 3-year upgrade cycle. When others went to do it, it didn't. And the reason was because, and I did try to explain this to my colleagues before I left, they would listen to what the person was telling them and would presume that person was talking honestly about what they needed. Whereas I would look at that person, what they were telling me, and I would put it alongside what they'd done in the past. I'd put it alongside some of their research product, what they were doing, and their teaching profile. And I would also look at the job, which is what the person who was in the role above them was telling me about their needs for their computers. And I would presume that at some point over the next 3 years, they're possibly going to have a promotion, and so they're going to need something added in. Now, why does that matter? Well, here's the thing. If you're likely to become a senior examiner and you're going to be looking at lots of papers, lots and lots of papers for your topic, that's going to take up a lot of RAM. Why is it going to take up a lot of RAM? Because lots of people will work their process. We were using Microsoft Windows systems, okay? But the students might be using Google, the students might be using Macs, they might be using all this sort of software, and they were going opening and closing and reading multiple of them. They might come in a PDF form, they might be using Turnitin. All these things will require RAM and become quite intensive. And if you add in, if there are going to be diagrams in it, if you're CAD or anything to do with ARTI that's going to have graphs and diagrams, your RAM usage is going to go through the roof. It's not supposed to, but it just does, because all those programs are RAM hogs. In theory, they should be fine. In practice, they always cause trouble. So the theoretical amount of RAM you're supposed to give someone is never enough. You double it. And that became my policy. That was basically my policy. But the thing is, I put that together. And I have the same approach when I'm looking at the history, when I'm looking at the ships. Because the thing is, the technology comes into existence and it might be useful. But why is it coming into existence? What were they looking at for? What do they want it for? RAM limits are usually what limit PC longevity, but the other thing was, were they going to need a graphics card or not? It's very easy to make. It's very difficult. You have to make the case for a graphics card set off, a graphics card to be included rather using an onboard graphics system in a university. But again, what are they using the computer for? And there's actually good reasons for there to be a graphics card added in if using certain pieces of software. One of the really fun things was when you were talking about the psychology profs, who would always be obsessed with their processing speed, and at that time really didn't think about their graphics cards, but were using software, especially with some of the stuff which did some of the visual things, which was incredibly intensive. So they needed extra graphics. Because that's how their systems worked. It was a really good experience, and I learned a lot doing it. I learned a lot. But again, I would often come back and spec the computers, and then it was a case of getting the computer for the right budget. And it's a case of, I've got X, but I've got X budget to spend on these computers. This person needs this person needs this person needs this. Okay, theoretically that's going to be more budget, so now I need to work out how I can get this. And that was the other fun thing. Sorting it out and making sure the proposals got through with the people who were going to sign off on the budgets. Always fun. But again, it taught me a lot about procurement. And the stuff about procurement that it really taught me and was really helpful was when I was, again, looking through naval history procurement, looking at it and going, hang on, the decisions aren't made on paper, they're often made in the conversations. The paperwork is one side of the conversation. It's what you see as the official paperwork. It's not the asides you have. It's not the discussions you have with your bosses and the various other stakeholders. It's not you quietly walking up to that lecturer's head of department and going, "You've budgeted X for computers." "Yes." "Why are you here, Alex?" "Well, you remember I spec'd your computer, Prof." "Yeah." "You want this guy to do pretty much the same as you're going to be doing?" "Yeah." "Why have you spec'd him? Why have you allocated a budget which is 20% less than your computer was?" "Oh. Did you not think about that, Prof?" "Well, I presumed things have got cheaper." "No, they don't get cheaper. But you know what? spec the budget up, and if you've got the funding, we're also looking to a new monitor for you, because I know you're currently having trouble with yours. How do you know that? Because your nose is currently touching your monitor when you're looking at it. I can see the nose mark on it. Also, have you considered getting your glasses prescription modified? I still don't understand. When I used to say things like that, I still don't understand why they all liked me. Channel, did you, during your stint as an IT technician procurer, did you ever offer a pull full sea lord and offer various undesirable options with optimal options so you wish they would pick? No, but I did regularly used to give them examples of what would happen if they didn't do this. My favourite was to run all the software which they were going to be doing on a standard machine. If there was a part, if they could deal with a standard machine, they got the standard machine. That was fine. If it wasn't going to work, what I would sometimes do is I would literally set up the computer on our testing stand, where we also did ghosting and those things, and would run the software that it was going to operate, and would just let it crash in front of the morning meeting. And then they asked why this computer was crashing. You know you want to put a standard PC in so-and-so's room. That's their software running on it. Okay, Alex. You've made your point. Really? Because the speakers aren't on yet. I can turn them on. They didn't get to hear the great tone. No, you made your point. Oh, it was fun. It was fun. Anyway, got some questions in. I don't think I'm really that contrary, but I'd say the most contrary thing I do is how I push history forward, and in terms of how I push history out. In terms of going everywhere. Now, I have to admit, sometimes I would egg the pudding a bit, because again, software has never got less intensive in its requirements. And if you know a department is going to be upgrading its software to the latest level of, let's say, psychological analysis, the 404, or whatever it's going to be, and you're currently on version 403, and you know the new one is going to be bigger and more problematic, you then make sure you include that in the system specs, and you go, yeah, it requires more. The usual response is, but it has the same minimum requirements. Yes, it has the same minimum requirements. But do you want me to use the fact that the Windows 97 and the other version of Windows, we had the full suite of versions of Windows at one point. That was fun to deal with. All theoretically have the same requirements. Do you want to use? Do you want to run them all on? Do you want to run the latest version of Windows on the computer, which could run the Windows 97? No, didn't think so. But no, they were. I was lucky. I worked in a really great IT department. They were far better technicians than me. They were far better at the technical side. I learned a lot from them. I really did learn a lot from them. And I took every exam and every test I could get in my hands on while doing it. But at the same time, I was probably better than them at ferreting information out of people. And I was probably better, or rather, because I was only technically working 2 days a week. I did 2 full day shifts with them while I was working for them. Sometimes 3 days. Went up to full time sometimes during the summer holidays when they needed extra work. They needed extra things installed and stuff like that. Yeah, it was fun. I learned a lot. Anyway, with that being said, there are questions in the chat. Yeah, I don't think I'll be in Discord then this evening. Discord's playing up enough this evening, and I don't think I'll trust it for late night chats for 2 years. I'll do Pirates of the Burning Sea tomorrow evening. Dave Harrison, they've given bad handwriting neurological diversity name of its own. Yes, it's dysgraphia. It's got its own name, Dave. You can call it dysgraphia. You can now claim yourself as dysgraphic. It's one of the few which are, how do I put it? You're able to self-diagnose. Alright. Let's see if I got the questions. And any more? Right. So, say it off. Why did the Spanish grant a monopoly contract to supply slaves to the Spanish Americas to the South Sea Company? What I've seen, Spain had a faltering domestic manufacturing sector, and so the South Sea Company was specifically set up to supply this country market. Especially when it could also trade British guns. Is this your understanding? Well, to an extent, yes, but also Spain had other issues, and there is money going on. There is money. And that's the thing. Spain at the time had money shortages in terms of cash shortage. One of the problems of the silver fleets and a lot of the South Americas is that they have... when Spain is empire in South America, is it's very rich on paper. But everyone's taking their cut. Everyone is taking their cut. And that means what the central government has to spend is not always that great. Yeah. And then channel. When you exposed your capital shit theorem to your father, if you did, it was in its early nascent form before he passed, unfortunately. What feedback did you get on it? Duh. Basically, it was, duh, of course. That's the other thing I find. One of the great lessons I've learnt from my working life and from spending time with the forces is the armed forces in the UK. It's the sheer amount of stuff which isn't written down. The sheer amount of stuff which relies on institutional cultural memory, which is passed from person to person, and is not written down in documents. And it's like the capital ship spectrum. When I talked about it with naval architects of my dad's generation, who were the last ones who really trained on the idea of capital, of building battleships and battle cruisers, and those sort of assets, to them that was obvious. Yeah, of course. You build the best version of the system you can to do it at the time, and the trade-off is, if we want a faster ship, it needs to have a greater length to beam ratio, so it needs to be longer. It's probably going to carry more power, and for us to accommodate more power efficiently, they're going to require more space, which is going to make its hull less dense, because it's going to need bigger spaces in the hull, and yeah, that's how we get greater speed. It's obvious, right? It's what you do. And so that was the fun thing. Now, again, heads up for things. I'm going to be in Rotterdam, and last weekend. Actually, and I can give you some dates. Right. I will be in Rotterdam from the 27th to the 1st. I come back home on the 1st. So I get into Rotterdam on the 27th, and I'm leaving on the 1st. And me and Gareth the Brit, aka Gareth, are going to be there all that time. I have no idea what we're getting up to, but we're getting up to some stuff. Then I am in Leeds, and I go up on the 4th, and I come down on the 7th. So I am back in time for Brew Ships on the Sunday, but there will be a premiere on the Thursday evening. But that means I'll be in Leeds on the 5th and the 6th. And I'm hoping to see a lot of people there. I really do hope to see a lot of people there in Leeds and Rotterdam. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm going to start doing more of that. I'm going to try and do more events and more meeting of people. The house is reaching a point at which it's going to be finished built. What might change is if everything goes to plan this weekend, potentially by Sunday, this will be taking all upstairs, or rather, maybe by Sunday, maybe end of next week, we'll be moving upstairs. Why do I say that? Because when the garage is built, that wall over there behind me is going to have its window taken out and be knocked through and have a door into the garage, obviously. And I'm going to use the time of clearing all my office out of here and moving my office upstairs into a spare room to paint this space. So basically, by the time we come back in here, which is probably going to be probably July time, this place will have been coated in a lot of orange paint, hopefully. So it'll kind of look like the brew shack again, and it'll be back into my sort of colours. Also, there will hopefully be a kitchen working up. Paul, Discord is working. I'm glad Discord is working, but I haven't had lunch, and I have now. When everyone said Discord wasn't working, I had mentally decided I was going to cook myself some burgers for dinner. So I'm sorry. Even if it is now working, I have mentally gone to burgers for dinner. So it's going to be fun. But yeah, so there is going to be changes going on. And as you can see, I'm currently building up to a 2-month supply of iron brew. I'm possibly going to expand it to a 3-month supply. I do think there could be, due to the energy prices, there could end up being shortages. So, these are things which are worthwhile considering for all of you. Just a heads up. Energy prices, it's predictable. There are things going up, but as we start to... What people often forget is that countries and companies tend to start stockpiling energy for the winter months in July. And so that is when you're going to start... when you start going to see increase. Basically, one of the reasons why you won't have seen as much damage in the energy market, change in the energy market currently, is because a lot of companies are using up their energy, using up the stores they built up over last winter when they needed extra. When they have to start rebuilding those stores and replenishing those stocks, that's going to be something that's going to affect prices. And so, yeah, if you can get anyone who's got long lead items you can get for food, etc., probably a sensible thing to start stocking up on those a bit now. Not in case of panic buying. I don't agree with panic buying. It's always it's always an expensive idea. But having a ready store is a sensible thing. You don't want to panic buy. Never be one of those people charging around Waitrose or Sainsbury's or Aldi, etc. at God knows what o'clock night trying to find the last toilet paper. You don't want to be that person. And yeah, as I said, I hope to see a lot of you in Leeds and Rotterdam. So, any questions? I'll do another few minutes, but as I said, I am thinking about those burgers now. I am hungry. I miss lunch. I was working up in the loft, and I still have 9 boards I have to do. Oh, yeah. No, the answer to the toilet issue is to how do I put this politely? Make sure you always have extra in the house. Leeds will be at the Royal Armouries, yes, and that's going to be fun. I'm going to wander. I'm not. I will probably wander around there on the Friday as well, because I've never been before. Let's look at everyone. Isn't panic buying basically what the Allies did when the war broke out too early? Yes, it is. It is. Will Poodle get burgers? No, Poodle will not get a burger. Poodle will get a giant bonio, not a burger. I was watching a debate online the other day where Peter Hitchens talked about Thatcher being saved from herself by Admiral Leach during the Falklands War, especially given the defence cut she had instituted. What did Hitchens mean by this? Honestly, there were quite a lot of people who believed the Falklands War wasn't a possible thing to win, so they shouldn't fight. And Leach walked in and said, yes, we can. And pretty much Leach was the only one who backed up Thatcher, and because Thatcher instinctively knew we had to fight. She did, that was understood, and her staff agree with that assessment at the time. But she didn't think we could. Leach said we could, so it's if Leach hadn't come in and said yes, we can do this and we have to do this, then potentially she'd have lost the war, which would have really damaged her politically. But some people sometimes over-egg that, but it's, it is there. So, yeah, basically, Admiral Leach, in the true traditional can-do attitude of the Royal Navy, went, yes, we can. And it worked. Right then, that being said, pretty much. With that being said, thank you very much everyone for being here. What have we got coming up? If I expand this out, what have we got coming up? Well, it's going to be Saturday now, is the Burke Supremacy. But the rest are going to be back to Tuesdays when they come out. Next Tuesday, though, it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be Friday's video. Which I can tell you what Friday's video was going to be. Because Friday's video was about Katsuoshi Kawano. So if you want to look him up, you can do. Key leader, Katsuoshi Kawano. That's what Tuesday's video is now going to be, but it was originally going to be tonight's video. So yes, Katsuoshi Kawano. And that'll especially get that. I have to admit, that's going to be especially fun for the people interested in the Far East. And Leslie's especially going to enjoy that one. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and I would do the trying to jump streams into people thing, but every time I do that, I seem to break Twitch at the moment. So I'm going to have a chat with Gareth the Brit, and find out what I'm doing wrong with raiding. Yeah. Let me just, for Leslie's attention, because, I know how much he cares about this, Katsuoshi Kawano. Look it up. Look him up. You'll enjoy it. Thank you very much, Sharon. Take care, and have a nice evening. Toodles. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel, watching it, and supporting it to growing. Thank you. Take care.